We've created more jobs, more new jobs than any other state in the country, save one.
We've created over 100,000 jobs in our state.
1.3 million net new jobs.
Our economy is growing and creating jobs at the fastest pace since 1999.
What? Job growth has been slow since the recession. But Obama was telling the truth there. This year, finally, we did have strong job growth. But I'm sick of these politicians talking about creating jobs. Government can create conditions that foster job growth if government mostly gets out of the way. But it's the private sector that actually creates real jobs. Our big government president once said this.
If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
He meant that government built the roads, educated the workers, and so on. But still, he was wrong. If you've got a business, you did build that. I assume the president's likely successor learned from his foolish mistake. No, here she is, just last year.
Don't let anybody tell you that, it's corporations and businesses that create jobs. You know, that old theory.
Theory? It's just true. Hillary later said she just meant to criticize tax breaks for corporations. But her statement and Obama's reflect their anti-business attitude. Government's good, business is often greedy and bad. And I assume Juan Williams feels that way because he's a proud left-winger, and Hadley Manning of the Independent Women's Forum doesn't like hearing that. But they didn't do it alone, Hadley. The government plays a role.
Well, of course, entrepreneurs, job creators, business people, like the rest of us, use public goods like public roads, and we can acknowledge that. But that statement from the president and from Ms. Clinton significantly understates the amount of individual risk and responsibility that entrepreneurs undertake. And my reading your body language suggests that you maybe don't disagree with her about that.
No, my hat's off to people who are capitalists and who take risk in order to produce profit.
What do these Democrats talk? What are they doing?
I think they're telling you the truth. Hadley touched on this. We have the best economy in the world for a reason, John. It's because of our laws, it's because of our worker protections, our investor protections, our consumer protections.
There needs to be some basic law and order to protect people so that they know when they're making a free exchange, they know what they're getting out of the deal, so that, they have the certainty and security of operating under law and order, a rule of law. They know what to expect. But by the same token, government has gone far too far in regulating every aspect of business, making it much harder for job creators to employ, hire, and give raises to people who deserve them.
I don't think that's the case at all.
93 million Americans are now out of the workforce. Mm-hmm. It's a new high number. People are choosing not to work. You don't think that's because of big government sometimes?
I think it's because we went through a terrible recession. I think we also have a demographic.
That was 7 years ago.
Yes, and we've had a very slow recovery.
But that's new. America used to bounce right back. How come?
Used to. I think, again, that was the severity of this recession.
I think we're looking at a private sector that's overregulated. I think that's part of the reason why we haven't bounced back, because people don't see the same rewards for taking that individual risk, for taking that individual responsibility, starting their own company, starting their own enterprise.
Because they may get in trouble for breaking some rule they didn't even know about.
And there's a lot of bureaucratic costs.
You know what? I find this astonishing. In the 1950s, when we had an economic boom in this country, post-World War II, tax rates were higher. Government, in some cases, much more intrusive.
Tax rates were higher, but there weren't all these regulations.
We had lots of regulations, and we had a very aggressive government.
They've never gone away. They always add more.
Oh, well, if you want to say they add more, I don't argue with you. I think government, I think it's a rule, tends to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and not always for better. But it's not the case, it seems to me, that we've never had government as a presence during the period of tremendous economic growth in our country.
For most of the history of America, government was 5% of the economy. Today, it's 40%. I would think that slows things down. But this disconnect, when politicians add thousands of pages of new rules and then say, we're creating jobs, lots of people on your side have no problem with that. Here's an example.
Why do people have this disconnect? They know that the government creates jobs. Every time in our life we knew World War II saved us economically. All our experience locally and historically is the government creates jobs.
Hadley?
Government can create jobs. I could give you a spoon and tell you to dig a hole with it and pay you, and that's a job. But did we really create any value?
While she's talking about wealth, I'm talking about job creation. And without a doubt, government plays a role in job creation.
But here's the thing. If we pursue, as a nation, increased productivity, increased wealth creation, the byproduct is jobs. We do create more jobs.
I don't
We're
think that's the
pursuing
case.
Added value.
Even if government rarely creates really useful jobs, government definitely can punish you if you don't pay people enough. So what's enough? America's minimum wage has been $7.25 for 6 years. That hasn't kept up with inflation. Now Juan's cronies want the minimum raised to $15 per hour. That good enough for you, 15?
Well, you know what? At the moment, it hasn't even kept pace with the cost of living in this country. These people are trapped in oftentimes low-income jobs.
A $15 minimum means they'll have no job.
Why is that, John?
Because some workplaces won't pay that. They'll automate.
It's basic math. When the cost of a good or service goes up, people buy less of that good or service. That applies to labor as well. When the price of labor goes up, employers employ fewer people.
Juan, if 15 is good, why not 50?
Well, obviously, 50 is going to have a direct consequence on the cost of it.
15 doesn't?
No. When you raise the minimum wage, it has almost no impact on people, employers saying, oh, we're going to do less business, close our business, or hire less workers.
I don't think that's true. I think if you look at what's happening in Seattle right now at SeaTac Airport, there are small businesses who say we cannot keep up with this mandated increase in labor costs. And I believe everyone wants more opportunities for people in low-income and middle-income jobs. The question is, how do we get there? A mandated increase in minimum wage is artificial wage growth. Real wage growth means that you do have a better quality of life, that the cost of living for you is lower than whatever your real wage is.
Well, I hope that what John said is true, that these minimum wage jobs would be a stepping stone, Hadley, that it would put you in position, if you are a good worker, to get a good
But we're
paying
taking
job.
away that stepping stone
I
from
don't
certain
think so.
people, low-income, low-skill workers who can't even get their foot in the door.
Oh, no,
Thank you, Hadley. And Juan, we're out of time. We can have an endless debate about minimum wages and union work protections, but it's nice that in America now we have a living experiment. Half the states, in the name of protecting workers, require workers at union companies to join the union. That way there's no free rider, people who get union benefits but don't pay the dues. 25 other states are what's called right-to-work states. They say you have a right to work without joining the union. Both groups of states say we're protecting workers, but they can't both be right. So we've got a good fight going on about this.
Governor, can't you see? Living wages, health care, pensions, the ability to retire.
Who's out? Who's out? They're trying to take what we love away from us, and we will get you out of your position.
That protest was in Michigan. It did not succeed. Michigan passed a right-to-work law. These protesters in Wisconsin didn't succeed either.
Are we fired up? Are we fired up?
The union did not have enough power to stop Wisconsin from becoming the 25th state to pass a right-to-work law. Economist Steve Moore says, good, right-to-work laws are great. But, Steve, I could see the union point. This is unfair to the union, because some people will say, well, if I don't have to pay dues, I'll get all the union negotiating benefits, and I won't give them any money. They're free riders.
The First Amendment says that you have the right of association, that you can associate with any group that you want to. But, you know, John, the First Amendment right to association also means you should have the right not to associate.
Yeah, I at ABC, I was forced to join a union. Right. You were once forced to join a union.
Yeah, when my first job, I was an Andy Frayne usher in Chicago, Illinois, where you also grew up, and I had a minimum wage job, and the unions took money out of my paycheck. Maybe that's where I developed some of this hostility to unions, because look, I felt like, what's the union doing for me? Second of all, shouldn't I be able to choose whether I want this union to represent me or not? And that's the attitude of a lot of workers. I don't want money taken out of my paycheck to pay for political activities. I don't want money to be taken out of my paycheck to pay for, these big parties and conferences they have in Las Vegas and things like that. Now, John, shouldn't that be the right of every individual worker? And by the way, it's not saying there shouldn't be a union. I mean, there are
But how can there be
unions
unions if people can free ride?
Because it's a right of you can get together with 20 or 30 workers, and they can
And that's your
collectively-
bargaining unit.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd say, we want, $20 an hour, whatever it is, and you can bargain on behalf of those folks. Work rules are very rigid.
Yeah, even if the union gets you a raise and helps you maybe for a couple of years, then those rigid work rules stop job growth.
They do. Well, here's the problem. Let's say you and I work next to each other, at a factory, and let's say I'm much more productive than you are. I'm showing up for work.
Sure, you would be.
All these things. Under a lot of the union rules, you and I have to progress at the same rate, and the most productive and efficient workers say, "Wait a minute, this isn't fair to me. I want to have my own contract."
So you'll start to slack off.
Well, exactly. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, we used to interview the heads of Fortune 100 companies all the time, and these were people who decide where they're going to build new factories and new plants, and they would say, "We don't even consider a state if it's not right to work."
Employment increased on average 8.6% in right-to-work states. Half that, 3.7%, in forced union states.
By the way, the biggest new thing that's going on in Charleston is they're building a massive Boeing plant to build these new planes.
Which left unionized Seattle.
It left Seattle, and everyone knows the reason it left is because they didn't want to have to deal with the union there. By the way, that's 7,000 jobs that are now in South Carolina that would have been in Washington State.
But the union says correctly that both union and non-union workers in right-to-work states have lower wages.
That might be true, but they also have a lot more jobs. I don't even believe that these workers in South Carolina feel like they're underpaid. They're swapping up those jobs. I mean, they're ringing around the block to get these jobs that pay pretty good salary.
But Steve, what would you say to union workers like these two?
All we're asking is to let us work, and unions and stuff have a say in our job. That's all.
You cannot dissolve the middle class if you think we're going to have progress. We spend money. We produce revenue.
A couple arguments they bring up I hear a lot from unions. We built the middle class.
Right.
You pay us more, we'll spend more, we build the economy.
If the unions are so wonderful for workers, then why do you have to force me to? Why can't I have the right to choose or not to choose? And when I talk to either workers or liberals on this issue, they don't really have a response to that. Why should you force people to join if it's such a wonderful thing?